Hello, welcome to Picture Me Coding. My name is Erik. My co-host, Mike Mull, is with me today. Hi, Mike.
Hey there.
Mike, we have a special guest star today. That's what you call people who join your podcast as guests. They're special guest stars. Special guest star today is Frank Holland. Frank, would you mind introducing yourself?
Yes, this is Frank Holland, and I guess it's just by virtue of appearing on the show that I've attained stardom because it hadn't happened previously. So thank you for that.
Tell us a little bit about your background, Frank.
Sure. So I'm somewhat of a product of my weird environment, which is rural Northern California to the hotbed of innovation and weirdness of the Bay Area, by a little school known as UC Berkeley. Perhaps we'll have the opportunity to talk about that and all of the wonderful things that we experienced in that place together, Erik.
Mike gives me a hard time for referencing it. Do you have anybody in your life who says that's one too many Cal references this week, Frank?
No. That's probably why I abuse the privilege. I need someone to keep me in check. So
what are you doing now?
So I kind of take it back, a little bit further and just say that I've not followed a really linear career path that has never particularly appealed to me. So after spending a good deal of time in Italy following college, doing some educational reform work, I came back, went into publishing, and then went back to Italy for graduate school to do some field research in political science, which seems like a peculiar place, but it's actually a really good place to do that kind of work because there's a lot of really odd things going on that can be instructive for other political dynamics you might find elsewhere. It's kind of a nice little laboratory. But
are you saying that Italy's a great place to study politics because they have a lot of it?
Yeah. Yes. Yeah, that's exactly what I'm saying.
Oh, okay. I get it.
That is a very incisive observation. But no, the bulk of my career has really revolved around media and politics in one form or another, with a stint in the public sector, in local government, which was really rewarding and interesting, and I enjoyed quite a lot. And now I'm in Washington, D.C. I have my own public affairs firm here, and my brain continues to operate in California. It's closest to my heart. But I am physically located on the East Coast.
Do you listen to music, Frank?
I do, as a matter of fact. I enjoy music, yes.
Mike and I talk about music at the beginning of the show. What have you been listening to lately?
So there are actually two things that I've been listening to a lot, and they're pretty different. But the first one is an artist by the name of Marcus King. I don't know if you guys have listened to him. Young guy. The best way I could describe him is kind of roots rock, crossed with Janis Joplin, a heavy dose of blues. Very talented guitarist, and his most recent album, which came out last year, it's really compelling because he was dealing with a lot of mental and emotional issues at the time, and it really comes through in this very interesting way. So I've been enjoying that.
Sorry, what name again? Marcus Kingman?
Marcus King.
Marcus King. Okay, sorry, thanks. And then the next one you were going to say?
And then the next one actually has its roots in a recommendation from you many decades ago. I decided that I am, as a new Washington, D.C. metro area resident, I should refamiliarize myself with Fugazi, which was one of my favorite bands in college. And I thought maybe I'll get something more out of it now that I live here, and it will speak to me in a different way.
Interesting.
And my primary observation is that it does not, but it's fucking good. Can I say that?
Oh yeah. Say what
Okay,
you
good.
want.
Yeah, still really, really, really good.
Hmm.
There's just something about the juxtaposition of Ian McKay and Guy Picciotto and the way their voices resonate and kind of feed off of one another, that I really, really enjoy. The kind of acoustic layering in every arrangement is way more interesting than you would anticipate when you start listening to the song. So I've been having a steady diet of red medicine and end hits when I'm out on my runs in the Maryland forest these days.
Some
It's nice.
surprising stuff in there. Mike, you ever listen to Fugazi?
Oh yeah, big fan of In on the Kill Taker.
Oh, Cha 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 Champion. That's the one I remember. Those are good picks, Frank. I gotta look at Marcus King.
Solid picks.
Oh, Mike likes
What about you guys? What are you guys listening to?
Mike, you want to jump in?
Sure. So my pick this week is a little bit strange. I think it's a rap album. It's by JPEGMAFIA and Danny Brown. It's called "Scaring the Hose." Fun name.
That's exactly what I thought you were going to say when I saw you come up today on the screen. Mike's going to pick "Scaring the Hose." Sorry, I hadn't heard this one though. Go ahead.
I gather this is a euphemism. The title is a euphemism for like doing weird or overly political music or something like that. That's not so fun. Anyway, this came out earlier this year, and I just keep coming back to it, and I keep asking myself, do I like this? And I think I do. It's a very interesting combination of stuff, interesting samples, interesting sound effects. Sometimes it sounds like there's like two songs playing at the same time. There's also some great track titles, which, gives a few points. Probably my favorite one is it's a really good track called "Garbage Pail Kids," where "pale" is spelled Pale. So anyway, there's another great track called "God Loves You" with a sample from a gospel song in the background. Just very listenable, but I keep asking myself, is this really music? Is this really rap? Somebody on Reddit called it punk rap. So
you guys have interesting picks this week. I've been listening to this guy I always thought of as like the Towns Van Zandt of Nebraska, and I never really listened to him before. And we were watching a TV show, Reservation Dogs, and his voice came on, and I was like, that sounds familiar. And I looked it up. It's like, oh yeah, it's this guy Simon Joyner. He's more country, not quite as what you're describing sounds interesting. I want to check it out, Mike. Simon Joyner is more, I mean, like Towns Van Zandt's a good characterization. It's just kind of folky cowboy. His voice is not, most people probably not listening to it and thinking, wow, this guy has a great voice. But for some reason, I find it compelling. He's got this line, "My life is in near rhymes, punch lines, cheap laughs, and you're talking blues." I really like that. My life is in near rhymes. I feel like my pick is a little more tamer than both of yours. Frank, when people come to you as a consultant, what's your special expertise that they're really they're coming to you for?
It's actually a funny question, because I think that my primary area of expertise is not having a really a particularly specific area of expertise.
Generalist.
It's the fact that I've had the opportunity to experience a number of different industries, public, private, nonprofit organizations. I've held a number of different roles and been able to understand those places in I would say fairly nuanced ways. And so, in a world where we're traditionally conditioned to specialize as much as we possibly can in order to succeed, the ability to connect dots and understand how things fit together in creative and interesting ways is often lost. So if I bring anything to the table, I think it's a kind of eclectic background and and some knowledge about, how communication arts and politics and media and government all kind of fit together in this weird milieu, and how you can get things done in that environment.
Do you get involved in helping to craft or modify, amend legislation as it's becoming law?
Things typically happen, and a lot of the time even the people, quote unquote, in the know, they don't know why. They happen because there are a handful of people that are able to broker a deal has to get done. There's some type of driver, or there's some type of trigger that necessitates a legislative deal, whether it's a funding reauthorization or a tax extender or something. And the handful of people with juice in the Senate, or the few committee chairs in the House, they get together and they cut the deal, and then a big omnibus spending bill comes out, and everyone's kind of jammed, and they vote on it, and then you sort through it afterward.
Oh wow! So there could be all kinds of stuff shoved in there.
Yeah, and there typically is, and it's not to say that there's bad stuff in there. I mean, although certainly, whenever you have bills that are thousands and thousands of pages long, not everything is going to be the greatest idea ever imagined. But
Mm-hmm.
but really, it's a product of the way the environment is now politically. It's the structure of the system, and ultimately, the structure of any system dictates the behavior of the actors in that system.
Wow, that's interesting. There's a lot of stuff you said that remind me of our field. So Mike and I talk about software a lot. You talked about generalists having a certain value as opposed to specialization. Um, you talked about how things sort of take on a shape outside of the intentions of people who would like to shape them. Mike, does this make you think of anything in our field? Is there anything that you can reach for?
I had a brief Conway's Law moment there when Frank was talking about the way the actors shape themselves to the system.
Can you describe Conway's Law for?
Maybe. It's kind of the opposite of that. It's sort of the idea that the things that you build will take on the organization of the organization that's building them.
Yeah,
and
right.
So
right.
It's kind of interesting to hear that it's somewhat the opposite in the legislative world.
It does sound like big ball of mud, though. Like if I were trying to build software in a similar way, it'd be like, let's cram as much stuff in there as possible, and who knows what's in there in the end. Frank, here's what I'm curious about. This is something interesting in our field. When people come to us and ask us to build things, they're often surprised by what's easy for us and what's hard for us. Do you have any similar surprises when people come to you and they want your expertise? You tell them, they may ask a thing, they assume it's easy, and you go, well, actually, that's not that easy. And maybe vice versa, if there's anything the other way.
So first of all, you're stepping on my question to you guys. I was going to, that's precisely what one of my questions to you is going to be. So,
we will totally we'll let Mike answer that one.
Because that is something that has fascinated me, as somebody assuming things and, often being wrong when it comes to technology. But, I think there are certain things that people assume. First of all, I think, and this is purely, I would argue, a product of our current media environment, and the way that the actors, political actors, respond to that environment that they are in. But everyone assumes motives. It's very easy to assume motives across the board for legislators, members of the executive branch, even our local government officials.
Can you sorry. Can you ground that in maybe an example, not maybe a hypothetical example, even like when you say assumes motives? What's an example of that?
Well, I mean, we all have our priors, and quite often those are partisan, and that colors our entire range of emotion around certain actors on the national or state or local stage. And so it's really tempting to say, well, the reason that legislator is carrying that bill is because it's going to be good for big business, those jerks. jerks.
Okay.
It's going to be, no, it's because he hates poor people.
Oh,
Or
okay.
or they're a shill for the environmental lobby. They're just terrible, and
Mhm.
they're trying to kill jobs. They're trying to kill innovation in America. And it's the interesting thing, though, and this is not an original idea. It's just one that I agree with very much, and a proponent that has made this case a number of times is Matt Yglesias, and he talks about secret Congress and high salience versus low salience issues. And when an issue reaches high salience, it's immediately hyper politicized, and people retreat to their various kind of partisan positions. They dig in, and even if it would otherwise be a fairly non-confrontational, not a hot button issue, once it reaches that level of notoriety and exposure and media attention, good luck. Good luck. But there's a lot of stuff that gets done on a day-to-day basis that's very collegial. I mean, I'll sit in committee meetings from time to time and watch these people operate. People that we see on the news that are hyper partisan, rabid culture warriors, and they're very collegial, and they get along talking about, water policy or wildfire mitigation or, low and no emission ferry service in rural communities. If you're a keen observer of Congress, there's stuff getting done all the time, even with the folks that are in there now that are, fighting to raise money. And, it seems like this kind of Manichaean battle at all moments. They're doing a lot of stuff together, and it's really peculiar when you realize that. So, to kind of come back to your original question, like what's hard and what's easy, I think a lot of people would assume, well, there's no way that these groups will work on my issue together. Well, generally there's a pathway. I mean, it might not be an easy pathway, but if you really sit down and you think about it, and you think about, unless you have some bizarre niche issue that benefits a single industry or something, there's probably a way to put together a coalition, to explain your argument, to make it resonant to the people that have the ability to move that issue. So, it's not easy. And there are certain great ideas. I have a couple in mind specifically that languish. They have bipartisan support, but for one reason or another, they don't move. But there's generally a way. There's generally a way. The big stuff, that's where you start to run into a lot of problems. And those, oddly, are the things that we all think, well, why don't we just fix healthcare? We need to fix it. We need to just vote the people in that'll fix it. And it's like, yeah, that would be nice. I mean, I would like that, but that isn't easy.
It's, Mike and I, in our field, we hear a lot of discussion about the hardest part of doing software development is typically working with humans and trying to get them to agree and come to consensus. And so there's this naive engineer's mindset sometimes, and I'm guilty of it, of thinking, wow, if I could just work on the code, everything would be great. It sounds like you only have the hard stuff.
Yeah, I don't know if I only have the hard stuff. A lot of it is really, a very kind of human interaction. It's explaining things to people. It's
getting buy-in.
Yeah. I mean, it's not easy. It's frustrating. I mean, you might have to explain the same concept to multiple people in multiple different ways, and that takes some work. You might have to convince some people, which is sometimes easier than others, but yeah, not necessarily.
Mike, you're pretty quiet over there. You want to jump in at all?
Gee, I don't know. Kind of out of my depth there.
Yeah, I feel that way too. Well, I got one for you. When I tried to convince Frank to come on the show, he said, I think if I come on your show, it'll increase my WRIS. And so I said, Mike, what is RIS? And Mike, you told me the definition of RIS. Do you remember you telling me what that was?
Not exactly. I think I read about it in the Wall Street Journal. So
Right, exactly. Yeah. So I was like, I need the slang definition. Mike said I read about that in the Wall Street Journal where I get my use slang definitions from. What was the definition there?
That tells you my level of coolness right there, I guess.
Right. I'm getting it from you. You're getting it from the Wall Street Journal.
My recollection is that, it's basically charisma.
Yeah, I guess. So here's what concerns me. Eventually, the Wall Street Journal as a source of use slang definition might dry up for us. And if you stop getting it, then I can't get it from you. And I'm going to be pretty out in the cold knowing what people are saying.
I know. You'll have
the Wall
to
Street Journal is a lifeline for that youth slang.
I don't know how we'll get it otherwise. I actually think a lot about things that dry up, like in California, when I look at the, in 30 years, what's the weather situation going to be like and how's it going to affect your region? It's always about water. I'm worried about water drying up. In your work, working with California associations and businesses, I know you work closely with a lot of people who are influential in California. Did you talk about water? Does that ever come up as an issue, Frank?
Constantly.
Does it really? Constantly?
Yes. Constantly.
Wow. Should I be worried or am I cool?
You are not cool.
Oh.
I mean, you're cool. You're very cool. But you're not okay.
That doesn't sound good.
We have massive infrastructural deficiencies with respect to above ground water storage, water transmission, making sure, we can manage flood risk, get water where we need it, when we need it.
Is this, you're talking California or nationally?
California.
Okay.
Well, arguably nationally, there are weird things going on. I mean, here's the frustrating thing, though, is these are solvable problems. All the things that I just mentioned in terms of, recharging aquifers, above ground water storage, building additional reservoirs, making sure we don't have the same evaporative issues on our canals that are, transmitting the water from north to south and so on and so forth.
The one next to the 5, when you drive up the 5, you see the water canal?
Yeah. These are all things that can be solved. If you look at the scale of the WPA, water projects from the 1930s, it's astonishing. It's incredible what we were able to do. I mean, these are not unsolvable, intractable problems. The bigger issue with that, in my opinion, is, we were in the midst of a crippling drought, a scary, scary drought. And we had one winter with, this kind of biblical amount of precipitation, snowfall, all of the ensuing runoff, refilling the reservoirs. And it's just, an avalanche of feel-good stories. And it completely wipes all of the what am I trying to say here? It completely wipes out any kind of motivation and sense of urgency around addressing those problems they're still there. They haven't gone away. We've seen, if you look at geological time, we've been experiencing these cycles for thousands and thousands of years, and we know that climate change is making it worse. But we have to have that sense of urgency, and that's what concerns me. Is it gets backburnered after 3 months of rain, and that's a real problem.
Wow, I was really hoping you'd be like, "Oh, you don't need to worry. We've got these plans in motion. We're going to build desalination plants. That'll solve the problem."
Look, I will say I have to hand it to the governor. He has really put a strong foot forward with respect to infrastructure and, availing the state to all of the federal funding available to retrofit our aging infrastructure and build the infrastructure of tomorrow. And I mean, this all sounds fuzzy, but it's really important stuff. And he's really made a strong effort to get it done. So, hopefully it comes to fruition.
It sounds like a thing you are in conversations about all the time, though. When you said all the time, it comes up.
Yeah. Um, yeah. I mean, it's one of those things you can't get away from in,
Hmm.
with respect to California politics and
Oh,
government. I
I
mean,
didn't know that.
even
I thought I was just on my own worried about it.
let's tie it back in though. I mean, no, here's actually, I'm talking to two technologists here. So here's a really salient tie-in, maybe. I mean, tell me if it's not, but, you
I got
know,
to tell you, every hard question you send our way, Mike's got to take it.
well, so our our problems with water, they're not just limited to drinking water and our ability to our ability to irrigate crops and maintain our agricultural sector. One of the main priorities of the Biden administration has been um, kind of reshoring semiconductor manufacturing to
Hmm.
the United States, and that's partially a national security issue. Uh, in terms of making that supply chain resilient.
Mm-hmm.
It's partially a geopolitical issue vis-a-vis our continuing somewhat strained relationship with China.
Mm-hmm.
And there are a number of good reasons to do that. Well, California is the home of the semiconductor.
Hmm.
Silicon Valley is, that's where it all started. There are no manufacturing plants for semiconductors in California anymore, and
Hmm.
there aren't going to be. And part of that is because the regulatory barriers are high. But another part of it is because you need a lot of water. You need a lot of water to be able to accomplish what they're doing on a manufacturing basis. And we can't ensure that if we don't have readily available supplies of clean water,
Hmm.
above and beyond what it takes to hydrate our population and irrigate our crops and everything else. It's just not going to happen. Now, Arizona has made a real play for that industry, and there are going to be fabs in Arizona. But I will tell you that's a concern.
They have water problems too.
They have serious water problems, and they're going to have to figure out how they square that circle.
Hmm.
So,
Well, you had a
So,
question. You had a question for Mike though in there somewhere.
did I?
No, I thought you said I have a question for you guys, and then I was like, okay, let me figure out how I can deflect this over to Mike, whatever it is.
I have a water question if we can stick it in here.
Yeah.
So I was driving up to Redding a month or so ago.
My homeland.
Had to go through the San Joaquin Valley, of course, and about every mile there's a sign that says, "Governor Newsom, why are you letting all the water run into the ocean?" And the implication, I think, being that we should dam more of the rivers so that we have more readily available water for irrigation. And I'm just kind of interested on what the general thinking on that is these days. It seems like probably a bad idea, but I don't really know if it's my environmentally leaning mindset that makes me think that, or if it's really something that isn't really a good option anymore, given the times we live in.
No, it's a really good question, and it's interesting because there's actually been a long-standing and broadly supported effort to remove obsolete dams from a lot of California rivers, the Klamath specifically, and return the kind of wild river environment that used to exist, uh, especially north of Redding. The Klamath, the Trinity to the west, and others. So,
Can I ask Frank, what makes
yeah.
them obsolete? Why are they obsolete?
Well, I mean, they're no longer useful for their intended purposes. A lot there were diversion dams that were set up for various reasons. There were some for power generation that are no longer functioning, and so the some of these dams will be removed over time. It's a big initiative of the Department of the Interior to get rid of these dams that are damaging the habitat for all kinds of fish and wildlife that use those rivers, but also it's a real issue within the tribal communities in those areas. But I do think that issue might, you know, I think that there are kind of two sides to it that get conflated. I grew up just south of Reading, in a really, really small rural town on the Sacramento River. My backyard actually was the river. And there was this, frankly, ignorant, but nevertheless ever present sense that we were exporting all of our, precious resource to Southern California freeloaders, and we don't get anything back from it. And I think, I mean, that reflects a profound misunderstanding of how things actually operate. But more than that, I think it's a reflection of the urban-rural divide, which is enormous in California.
Country and the city, yeah.
Yeah, yeah. I think that's in a lot of ways that is a much stronger political dynamic at play in the state of California with, the population that it has, and the stark contrast between a place like Shasta County or Glen or Tehama and, Santa Clara or San Francisco or LA. Mm-hmm. And then I think the other side of that about, letting the water run off, California has passed water bonds to build infrastructure like critical above ground storage. The Sites Reservoir right off of I-5, that project has been waiting in the wings for years and years and years, and it has funding allocated, and it could have collected a lot of that runoff without, damming a wild river. But we haven't gotten it done. It's really difficult to build infrastructure in California. So
why is that?
The biggest culprit, and this is a true irony, but it's our landmark environmental quality law. It's the California Environmental Quality Act, CEQA. And it really was a very necessary and important piece of regulation introduced many, many years ago. And it has since become kind of the cudgel of choice for anyone that wants to not do something.
Oh.
And it's used, most abusively, I would argue, it's used in the context of housing development.
I was curious about housing.
We need to build millions of new units of housing for Californians to be able to keep up with demand and to be able to, have our kids, if they want to stay in the state, have an affordable place to live.
But so I have a pretty dumb question here. CEQA, Environmental Quality Act. People use that to argue against building housing. Why wouldn't they want to build housing? This is a pretty dumb question, probably.
Well, I mean, I guess I could use some of the more outlandish abuses of the law, and maybe we could talk about some of the more pedestrian ones. But
well, I have one. If somebody comes to me and says at work, "Hey, I want you to send out 1 million emails," I could be like, "No. CEQA, this is not environmentally conscious." I could use that maybe to resist doing that work.
Maybe you could. The courts have been really favorable toward very creative uses of CEQA. I mean, for example, UC Berkeley has. Hey, there it is again. I promise I didn't mean this to be.
I just want to interject that I don't have an anti-Cal bias. One of my sons went to Cal, so go Bears.
He just has this whiteboard in the back of him that's like, we got to increment the number of references. How many days without a reference? Go ahead.
You could throw the Cal reference out. This is purely coincidental that it happened at Cal, but Cal, right smack in the middle of the Bay Area, ground zero for the housing crisis, extremely, extremely expensive, and you have a not insignificant percentage of college students that are living in their cars that are functionally homeless.
Wow, really?
Yes, I believe the percentage across the entire UC system is, and I could be wrong. You'll want to fact check me on this, but I believe it's close to 7%.
Wow. We don't do fact
Um,
checking, Frank.
Yeah,
I'll fact check it.
make
I'll
up whatever
fact
number
check
you
it.
want. Well,
I mean, it's shameful though, right?
Yeah,
That's
that's amazing. I would
it's
not have
not
expected
okay.
that.
So
No.
Cal owns a significant amount of property around the university, and they own People's Park.
People's Park. I had a feeling that was coming. Yeah, People's Park.
And People's Park, as we know, has been kind of a flashpoint for controversy and protest for the better part of 50 years. When the university first wanted to develop it for housing. It's reached a point now, though, if you go there, and I was just there a couple months ago, it really is squalor at this point. It has any of the original kind of counterculture, free speech movement, 1960s, 70s Berkeley charm that once existed is long gone. And the real thing that is that the student population is screaming out for now is a place to live, is affordable housing. So Cal decides to respond to this. They're going to develop People's Park. They have the plans. They end up being sued under the auspices of the California Environmental Quality Act because the students will create noise because they're loud.
Oh, wow.
And noise pollution was not studied under the environmental impact report. So they need to they put a halt to the development, while you still have students living in their cars.
Wow.
Because they may be noisy for the neighbors over on Hillegas.
Hey, I have an out of the box suggestion for solving this one. I heard that the Oakland A's, I know you are an Oakland A's fan, that they're going to move, and their stadium probably is zoned for lots of noise. Could they live there? Maybe if the Oakland A's move, then the Cal students could go live in the Oakland Coliseum. That's a pretty good suggestion. I'm patting myself on the back for that one.
I like it. If the Coliseum could fix its sewage issues, I think that could be a real game changer, Eric.
There's always something. Your job sounds so much harder than ours.
I don't have to fix the sewage problem at the Oakland Coliseum. So.
Oh, okay. All right. That's somebody else's thing.
It's not on me.
Do you have questions for us about software and technology?
I do.
Oh,
I do.
Okay. I thought you'd say no, and I'd be like, okay, cool.
No.
All right.
No.
I will. Let me take a drink of water, and then I will be ready to hear them. Go for it. Shoot them at us.
So something that I've always found really interesting in my limited experience, developing, whether it's web platforms or standalone sites or applications or whatever, is this kind of I almost think of it as like a Cartesian mind-body duality between design and dev, right? And I feel like I've run into so many issues where there's not a really cohesive relationship between the back end development side and the front end designers. And I've always just wondered about, what is that relationship like? How do you work together? And what makes a good team in that respect to produce the best product?
Ooh, that's an interesting question. Let's give Mike a chance to answer it.
Yeah, excellent question. Excellent point. So I think from my perspective as a technologist / developer, I think the hard part in this to me is that there are human beings involved. So first of all, there are end users, and when you're trying to present them with something, you want to present them with something that makes sense to them, is intuitive, isn't surprising, uses their language or uses the metaphor that they're familiar with. So there's a process here of somebody has to talk to those end users and figure out what they want to do in most organizations now, there are people who are experts in this, designers and UX experts and that kind of thing. And then their work has to be relayed to front end engineers, and then down the line, so that the front end engineers have to be able to do the things that they functionally need to be able to do based on what the back end developers provide them with. So I think the reason why this is hard and why it's so infrequently done well is because you're essentially trying to interpret something that a fairly sophisticated end user is trying to do with limited knowledge of their field, and also with like multiple steps down this chain of expertise. And it's sort of a classic game of telephone where things don't get relayed correctly, and sometimes when they do get relayed correctly, it's difficult to actually do them in the way that they need to be done to satisfy the requirement. So I don't know. Is that too vague, Erik?
No, I think that's a good point. I mean, I might give an example, like you said, imagining what the end user is doing. If you imagine some sample application, like if we imagine you're going to go to your bank website and we have to figure out how to build your bank website, then we have to get ourselves in the mind of the profile of the person using the bank website. And if it is some domain that we don't know, where we can't actually sit mentally in that, we can't sympathize with that user, it's hard for us to anticipate the problems that are going to come up with what we're building. I guess I would concur with Mike, though, that a lot of this is communication based. The best mesh flow that I've had in those scenarios are where I have extremely good communication with a counterpart who's doing, say, a front end. And we have also in our field seen specialization and then more generalization. There's a term full stack developer, which is
those are like the Shohei Ohtani people, right?
Yeah, that's a baseball reference. Yeah, so Shohei, amazing pitcher, amazing hitter. Yeah. But then there has been increasing specialization, and sometimes people self-select. I tend to do a lot more what we call back-end dev and infrastructure development. And the reason is that I am pretty limited aesthetically. So I can try to implement the look and feel of something that's been given to me as a design, but I don't have any critical feedback as I'm doing it, because I just aesthetically just don't tend to have the right perspective. I just look at it and go, yeah, okay. If you looked at something I designed on my own, in other words, it'd be horrible. You'd want to gouge your eyes out. That's what I'm saying. So
do back end people or the front end folks have more riz?
oh wow, that's can we pass? I'm gonna pass on that one.
I'm gonna say that the front end people are definitely the higher riz class of people. As a back end developer, I actively sort of try to avoid that and be as nerdy and antagonistic as I possibly can.
It is probably surprising, though, to discover sometimes how divergent these two areas can be. If you're working on a web application, for example, you might click on a thing on the screen and something is happening in the background, and there's almost like a clock you can imagine spinning around and waiting for more things to update, more data to come through. And these things fire off asynchronously in the background, and you've got to have things sort of loosening for updates. And some of those things that fire off will send off requests to a backend server, and it's maybe going to have different constraints. It can do everything sequentially or synchronously. And sometimes these modes of development can result in divergent ways of thinking about how to solve problems too.
I have an interesting anecdote about this that we can edit out later if it turns out to be irrelevant. But early in my career, so my initial educational background was in chemistry, and early in my career, I was working on software that was used by scientists and people doing pharmaceutical development to model molecules. And because of this issue with the difficulty of translating the end user's requirements into software, a lot of the people involved in actually building the software were people with PhDs in this field. So anyway, at one point while I was working for this company, there was this terrorist attack in Japan, I think in Tokyo, where somebody had released some nerve gas
On the
on
subway.
the
Yeah.
subway.
Yeah.
It was this cult. I think they Shinrikyo or something like that.
Wow.
Anyway, a news story came out that they had purchased a license for our software, and so there was some panic within the company, and they eventually put out a press release, and the substance of the press release was effectively, well, they may have a license, but our software is far too complicated for them to use. So,
That sounds like a great marketing pitch for the software.
yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Frank, do you have other questions about software technology that we can take a fumble at?
I do, if
Charlie
you
Brown
don't
style.
mind. And I have to say, no, Mike, you just teed this up. I was going to ask it anyway, but it couldn't be more on the nose because you mentioned that your academic background was in chemistry. And what I thought was really interesting, because Erik, obviously, we've known one another before either of us had a career. So, I find it really fascinating that you could. I mean, this feels like a radical transition into a totally different, you know, set of you know, language and knowledge and expertise and everything across the board. It's like you warped into a new universe and then were able to function there. And Mike, that you would have your background uh, in chemistry, and then that would lead you to this long, fruitful career in software development. And I've always just kind of thought, I mean, I have this completely unfounded gut feeling that that must be a really good thing. Like, there must be very few of you guys that have a non-traditional background. You didn't go and study computer science at Caltech or something, and then pursue this very linear path to becoming a developer. And I just imagine, like, these guys must be connecting dots that nobody else can connect. And I'm curious, is that the case? And do you see that with other people that come from non-traditional backgrounds into technology, that they're able to do things that other folks maybe aren't because there's some path dependency around what they learned in a more formal atmosphere?
I think I'm going to take a quick pass and then I want to kick it over to Mike here. But I would say that it's actually rare for me in my career to work with people who studied computer science.
Hmm.
Whether or not it's an advantage, I don't want to speculate. I mean, I had to self-study a lot of that stuff, and I do have gaps in my knowledge, and I feel those gaps myself. I guess I have a different kind of take, but I want to hear what Mike wants to say about this.
Well, I should probably preface it by saying that, I'm 15 years older than you guys. So I kind of grew up in a different era where, people with computer science degrees were something of a rarity. But I think I've kind of gone through the same thing that Erik has, where I was good enough at it and in a specialized enough realm when I started to be able to make progress. But I did have to backfill a lot of knowledge over the years. You have to learn stuff about algorithms and stuff about software engineering that people probably did learn in school.
Hmm.
I too have worked with a lot of people who don't have computer science backgrounds. And I should probably note that one of my sons has both bachelor's and PhDs in computer science. So I
Wow.
definitely respect those people. But
Yeah,
um,
me
I do
too. I mean,
think
go ahead, Mike. I'm sorry.
I do think there's kind of it's probably a little bit self-selecting. So I think that people are
Hmm.
sort of intellectually omnivorous, do kind of like to
Hmm.
go into this field because of the fact they get to expose to a lot of different ideas.
Uh, I'd probably say two different things in response to your question. I don't know if I can really adopt the like I'm going to make different connections because of my background. Maybe that's there, but I wouldn't be able to comment on it objectively. Um, I think the first thing that I think of is my grandfather, who was like a bench mechanic for Lockheed and then got promoted as an engineer, which was uncommon. And then he was writing Octal, which is pretty much like a numeric software. And he wrote stuff that ran continuously for 30, 40 years. He always, when I started doing software development, he said, "Oh, that's great. All the best developers I ever knew were linguists or people who were fascinated by language." And there is an aspect of writing code sometimes that's like doing philosophy, where you're pursuing a logical idea to its conclusion in your head. You're imagining if somebody says this and it means this in this context, what is the next thing that follows? There's like
You
a
see
kind
syllogisms and enthymemes everywhere.
of yeah, maybe. Yeah. The other thing that reminds me of writing is there's two components to writing software that remind me of like writing essays or long form journalism or something like that. One is you have to be almost obnoxious about whether or not you really want the comma there. If you give a piece of writing to somebody and they say to you, you should take this comma out, and you have this burning, passionate response, no, that belongs. And I already thought about it for 8.5 minutes. Leave the comma. That's how programmers are. They'll look at stuff like indentation and white space and curly brace, and they will argue about this stuff. And there's this attention to detail that is similar to writing. And there's something else that's similar to writing. When I used to teach essay writing, I would constantly try to get people to think about big picture and specific examples. So going from the small to the large. You have a point you want to make, give me an example. How does the example relate to the point? And so it's kind of like global versus local thinking. And when you work on a software application, you really have to do the same thing. I'm writing a function, I'm writing a class, I'm writing an if, expression where it's like, if this happens, then this. And I need to know at that moment what it means. And I need to know what it means globally. And if I'm going to organize a code base, I'm going to create a function. It's going to go inside a file, and that file lives in a particular place. And how do I find the right home for that thing? This is very similar to me to essay writing. On the other hand, I don't think I could ever tell somebody, you should study what I did. I do feel it often as a lack, the knowledge I don't have.
So I have a question. Do you guys ever, you're capable of kind of spinning something out of nothing when it comes to writing software. You can imagine a thing that accomplishes an objective and go out and create that. Are there things, whether in government or other institutions, that you think, God, that wouldn't be hard? Like, why don't they do it this way? Like, there should really be an application that they should just do this.
Oh, that sounds like every tech person on Twitter I've virtually ever read with a large following. We just take the same practices we have in our field and we apply them methodically to all the problems of the world, and we will solve them all, right?
Yes, this is the techno-futuristic optimism that we all need to adopt, and just get in Elon's spaceship and go to Mars and be happy.
I don't buy it. I think those things are hard for, I guess I don't feel like I can speak to fields that I haven't worked in.
Well, fair enough. Take it back to the question that you posed, or the statement that you made earlier, because I really am curious about this. Like, what is the thing? And it's a two-part question for each of you. Like, Mike, what is the thing that everyone assumes is easy? Like, oh, you just knock that out in an afternoon. For you, that's not an issue, but is actually really hard. And then the reverse of that, what's something that people assume is going to be, a million man hours, and it actually is a complete non-issue?
I'm going to take them in the reverse order, I think.
Sure.
So I think one thing that people assume that I do not find true is that the actual writing of the code is the hard part.
I assume that.
I think there's kind of this myth of the genius coder that's come out of popular culture and so forth, that there are people who are especially good at that and can be vastly more productive, and there's people on TV who can write code to hack into the CIA and in 30 seconds while, they're being watched over their shoulder and stuff like that.
Yeah, I think that's called hacking into the mainframe.
Yeah,
yeah.
exactly. So if you have a pretty good idea of what you're trying to accomplish, coding is not the hard part. Coding is relatively straightforward. Once you've reached a certain level of experience, and that's one reason why developers like that part of the job, is because, you can put in your headphones, you can sit there alone and just crank through stuff, get into a flow. Um, that I think one of the things that I've found that people think is going to be easy, but is very difficult, is, and this has come up over and over in my career. Somebody will say, we have this data in a particular form. So, our company has been doing this thing for 20 years now, and we've collected all this data in Excel spreadsheets. And now we want to put it into a database. How long is that going to take to do? And I think people have this image that there's some sort of like, you know, one line solution to this that reads in the spreadsheets and sticks them into a database.
It's a cell formula, right?
Right. Yeah, exactly. It's just
equals into database end parentheses.
Exactly. So, that's something that's sort of, I'm sure what Erik will end up saying is that there's all these issues of dealing with people and developing consensus and things like that. But just from a sort of a nuts and bolts task, this idea of taking data from processes that we've used for the last 20 years and putting them into some modern form, it's even though it happens over and over and over again, it's still very difficult every time people do it. And it's kind of hard to get into the details of why, but my
that was going to be my follow-up question, is if this is something that comes up a lot, have you found a certain mode of explaining the complexity that works really well for the layperson? I mean, is there a visual aid or something that you bring out and say, see, this is why this is a massive pain in the ass?
I usually talk about Heidegger or Wittgenstein.
I'm sure that resonates. I'm sure that touches people where they need to be touched.
Yeah, people inevitably say, "Oh, well, now that you've related to Wittgenstein, I totally see what you're talking about." I have not. I think there's some sort of common themes that I've gone back to sort of explain to people why this is hard. One is that the data, like for instance, I worked on a project one time where this is a little bit of inside information. Hopefully I'm not giving anything away here, but I was working with some very large companies that do product formulation, and all of the secret recipes that they had for their formulations were in spreadsheets. And, which is astonishing, first of all. But secondly, these spreadsheets weren't like in some centralized repository that was secured and that everybody had access to. These spreadsheets were spread around on various people's laptops, and these are big companies with large compliance departments. So, one of the issues is just simply finding the canonical version of each set of data, which is not really a technical problem. It's sort of a human problem. Another issue is that these things drift. So, in a database, you want to have certain fields, you want to have certain tables and the relationships between them. And, but what's happened, since Excel does not necessarily have those constraints, or some other spreadsheet, they drift. They have the field names become different, the number of columns become different. The things, the formulas that people find interesting are there in some spreadsheets and not in other spreadsheets. And so I think the thing that I try to explain to people with these types of projects is that this is not simply algorithmic. We can't probably just can't sit down and write code to grab these things and extract the data and shove them into something. There's a process involved here where we need to standardize and find the canonical version of things, and so
it's a
Yeah,
high.
maybe my
It,
example would be similar. I find that I'm in these conversations over the years, and people will say, you have some business rule, and then I'm like, well, what value do you want to add in here? And they're like, well, let's make it a date, and let's make it 30 days ago. Okay, surprisingly hard for me to just do, a month ago in code. This is the type of thing that surprises people, that it's difficult. Got to deal with
yeah,
time zones. We have to deal with weird time zones around the world. Sorry if you're in a weird time zone. I guess I shouldn't give that as an example. Adding and subtracting money is another thing that people are surprised by because of the
really,
rules. Exactly. Yeah, really. Yeah. Because you go to your bank and you expect them to do it reliably.
yeah,
Because of the way numbers are encoded in computers using floating point math and the spec around floating point math, you have to be very careful not to use floating point math to add and subtract money. If you think about it, there's no such thing as a number with a decimal point, really, at the level of a CPU, which is going to hold information in
huh,
registers. You got integers, so
yeah,
you're always dealing with relationships between integers, and there are limitations to the relationships you can express between two integers.
huh,
And this famously translates into problems where if I like add $1.03 to another cent to it, I might get some number like 1.049999, like,
mm,
so you have to deal with that type of stuff. People are surprised by this. The easy things I would say is that certain types of scaling often surprise people. We'll write an application and it'll do, maybe Mike solves this problem where I'm pulling a bunch of stuff out of Excel and the company is like, oh, this is cool. You got it solved. And then they go, well, how can we do this every day or every 10 minutes? And you go, oh, well, that's pretty easy. And they're like, oh, really? Yeah. So you could sort of pretend that it takes a long time to go from I wrote this thing that we run once to running it millions of times. Obviously, there are limits to scaling, but certain types of scaling are trivial to accomplish.
yeah, yeah,
And I think the other thing I would say back for your initial question, your other question too, about people and backgrounds and stuff is we're talking a little bit about communication and conversation. It does come up, needing to be able to communicate, not only people who are my peers, but people who are sending me requests or giving me feedback on my work. And I think one thing that has drawn me to software development is it's very egalitarian. If you're willing to do the work, put in the time, learn how to do it, there's no barrier to entry. It's
hmm,
kind of cool to be in a field that is that egalitarian. I really don't think there are, to my knowledge, there really aren't that many fields this egalitarian. You
yeah,
show up, you do the work, you communicate, and you get a seat at the table.
yeah. Mike, I understand that you're interested in lithium. Is that
Oh yeah,
accurate?
yeah. I told Mike he could ask you questions about lithium mining. He keeps talking to me about it, and I'm totally lost. And I was like, you know what, Frank's your guy.
yeah. So I get these weird obsessions from time to time, and
Yeah.
my latest one is sort of figuring out the technical and geopolitical issues around mining for various metals, copper,
Yeah.
lithium, cobalt, tantalum, that kind of thing. Um, Lithium in particular, I find interesting, and there is a California angle here.
Hmm.
So,
The
I'm
Salton Sea.
Salton Sea, yeah, exactly. So
I
I've
didn't know that.
I've come across this thing where there's this idea that there's pretty significant reserves of lithium in the Salton Sea, and there was a blue ribbon commission impaneled, and there was I think even Gavin Newsom visited there, and so but on the flip side, in a lot of the news that I see about lithium mining, I don't hear much about it. There's a lot of news about this McDermott caldera in Nevada
Hmm.
and the Thacker Pass mine and so forth, but I hear almost nothing about this Salton Sea project, and so
Hmm.
I've been kind of curious to know, is it just sort of theater, or is there something to this?
Yeah. I wish that I had a higher level of expertise on the specific project, but you raise the geopolitical issues, which are really significant. And with respect to McDermott, especially, and actually, I believe the principle on the Salton project is the same. It's Lithium America or something to that effect. And they, the big claim with the Salton project is that the way by which they would extract the lithium from those clays, the soils, it would be far less energy intensive and far more environmentally friendly, and therefore it would be a greener mode of extracting the lithium we need for the electric vehicle revolution. And I don't, have a level of expertise commensurate with probably with either of you guys on this even, let alone somebody who actually knows what they're talking about. But
Frank, Mike mentioned a thing called tantalum, and I was like, "Did you make that up?" And he was like, "Have you never looked at the periodic table of elements?"
We're not all chemists, Mike.
We all should be.
To get this lithium from Salton Sea, does you have to drain the Salton Sea? Do we have to commit to not having the Salton Sea anymore?
The Salton Sea is kind of draining itself.
Oh, okay.
My understanding was that Berkshire Hathaway has geothermal plants in the region.
Correct.
And so they were planning on sort of incorporating the lithium mining into those plants, because the lithium in this particular case is, I think, what they call brine. So it's in the liquid, and they can somehow extract it. Whereas with
they use sulfuric acid.
Right.
Wow, this sounds gnarly.
This is actually really interesting, though, from a political context. I mean, if we just look at the McDermott project alone, which is it's literally right on the Nevada-Oregon border. So far northern Nevada. And it's it's either on or immediately adjacent tribal land. And so there's a huge issue here with sovereignty and Native American rights and, maintaining the sanctity of that space. This has been a huge priority of the Biden administration. And Deb Haaland, the Secretary of the Interior.
When you say this, is it this project or lithium in general?
No. Excuse me. Restoring some agency to tribal governments and restoring resources to tribal governments and making them full partners in a lot of these environmental and energy initiatives that have been rolled out over the past couple of years. So this is if we kind of put that here on the shelf and say that's a big priority and has been a demonstrated priority of the administration. The next one is one that we mentioned before, which is, building in some resilience to our supply chain, reducing our dependence on China, and reshoring some of these green technologies to the United States. And, certainly electric vehicle battery manufacturing, which requires a lot of lithium, that falls right within that bucket. The other thing that's very interesting, though, is, as I understand it, the key player for sure the McDermott project, and I believe also the Salton project, the largest shareholder of that organization is Chinese. So when you look at the different dynamics, not to mention the potential environmental issues, depending on the way by which that lithium is extracted and what happens with the brine and all of the detritus, there are a lot of different considerations, a lot of different players that have real standing in that conversation. And you see it often. I mean, the administration's environmental and climate objectives running up against some of these other issues at the local level, where people are saying, hey, wait, I don't know if I want a lithium mine down the highway from me, or or I don't know. I'm not sure, I mean, with respect to housing in California, that's the kind of NIMBY YIMBY divide that we're experiencing. Like, yeah, we need more housing, but I don't know if I want an apartment building across the street, right? So,
Mm-hmm.
we have these, a lot of really noble objectives, and in a lot of cases, we're rolling out plans to achieve them, but it remains to be seen in a lot of cases whether we have the wherewithal across the board, and adequate buy-in, considering that there are going to be trade-offs.
Hmm.
And I think, like, we've, as a society, we've kind of, we feel like we don't have to make trade-offs, and we shouldn't have to make trade-offs.
Ooh, that's an interesting little distillation. We
Yeah.
feel like we shouldn't have to make trade-offs. I feel like that's something I can sympathize with. Hearing, anyway. Heard that, yeah. So, Frank, you're our first special guest star on our podcast. And really, what I wanted to know is when you're going to start your podcast, and Mike and I can then maybe be special guest stars on that. Are
Well,
you
see,
planning to start one?
I would love that, but I don't have. See, both of you guys have this really fantastic timber. I believe
Meh.
that's what you call it. To
You
your,
don't need that. You just need a
you have,
topic. Maybe we could pitch some topics at you.
yes, give them to me. I mean, maybe one will speak to me, and then you know.
I think you should do something about the Oakland A's. History of the Oakland A's have been in Oakland for 50 years. You've been a fan. Bash Bros, 80s.
Yeah,
There's some good stuff in there. What do you think? Mike,
I
what topic would you want Frank to cover? Frank, sorry, you want to jump in?
no, I like that. I'm very soon, as soon as the ink is dry on the MLB's relocation committee vote to let them go to Las Vegas and build this stupid little stadium, then I'll be fully a free agent and in the market for a new baseball team. And living in Maryland, I feel like it's a good time to accept the Orioles. Yeah,
Oh, I've
it's a
heard of
good
them.
bandwagon time. Yeah,
They're a good team.
they play in Baltimore, which is a city in
I've
Maryland.
heard of that too. That's John Waters' city. Yeah, pit beef sandwiches. That's what I know about Baltimore.
Edgar Allan Poe too, right?
Right. Nancy Pelosi.
I thought she's from San Francisco.
The Wire.
She was born in Baltimore. Her dad was the mayor of Baltimore.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Yeah. Yeah.
Mike, what do you think Frank should have his podcast on that we can be special guest? I don't think if you had an A's one, I could be a guest star on that one. So it's a bad suggestion from me.
I would listen the heck out of a podcast on like infrastructure politics or supply chain politics. Me and like 6 other people, we would just be like all over that.
Yeah, I would probably be asking Mike weekly, hey, what'd you get? Anything interesting?
I hear that. I hear that in the contemporary media landscape, you want a core committed group of listeners. You want a hardcore audience, not a superficial broad audience. So maybe that if it's the right 6, that sounds right to me, Mike.
Oh, hardcore. That sounds like what Elon likes to do with his software dev. He likes hardcore dev.
Yeah. Did you guys think about that? Did you talk? I actually want to know though, like when that dropped, that anyone that was going to stay at Twitter needed to be hardcore, right? Was there a conversation within your guys' professional community about what exactly that meant?
Oh, I think most people like us took that to be a very bad sign.
No, but like in your opinion,
seriously, we thought, okay, there's a guy who wants you to work 68 hours a week. I mean, startups have a notorious culture, a reputation, maybe earned, maybe not, that if you go work at a startup, it's a small number of people. You're going to wear a lot of hats. There's a lot of work that needs to get done, and people are grinding out long hours often.
This is like wear a diaper and eat trail mix.
Yeah, I've never done that. I've never heard of anybody doing that, but it's possible. Yeah.
Do you guys? I feel like you guys are closer to Elon than I am. I mean, both physically because you're in California, and also
spiritually, maybe.
Spiritually, certainly. Professionally, maybe. I don't think he's written software in quite some time. But do you think that your Riz level would rise in Elon's eyes if, as a Twitter employee, you showed up in a diaper? and just said,
I'm gonna let
I'm
Mike
not
take that
leaving.
one.
I'm not leaving, Elon, until we get this done. Let's
That
bang it out.
is a really tricky question, and all I can say to it is, God, I hope I never have to find out.
All right, that's a good place for us to close. Thanks so much, Frank, for joining us. It was fun having you.
It was a lot of fun. Thanks.
So this has been Picture Me Coding. My name is Erik Aker, co-host Mike Mall. We'll see you next time.
Yes, we will.
Bye-bye.
Thanks.